Poochie, we're in Chicago. You're out here homeless. You told me you were just laid off.
Yeah, I had a little job passing flyers out for a jewelry company on Michigan, but they laid us off, 11 of us off, so I had to come back out here. But I stay in a border house now.
You do?
I were living behind that jewelry store over there. With the grace of God, I'm now in the border house. But I stayed out here 2 years, living out here on the street, sleeping on the sidewalk.
What?
Hate, heat. People think of Chicago as cold, and they're right. But Chicago also burns in summer. And for someone without a home, both seasons can feel like the same sentence, with different punctuation. In July, the pavement radiates like a stove. In January, the wind off Lake Michigan cuts through layers like they aren't even there. And somewhere between those extremes, on sidewalks and under bridges, in train stations and emergency shelter lines, thousands of people are trying to survive another night in a city that never stops moving. Chicago is famous for its skyline, its music, its food, its history. But there's another Chicago that doesn't make the postcards. A Chicago where home is a corner you can defend, where sleep is a risk, where you carry your entire life in a bag, because anything left behind might be gone by morning. You've probably walked past it. You've probably driven by it. You may have seen someone bundled up on the sidewalk and felt that instant urge to look away, because looking directly is heavy. It makes you ask questions you don't want to ask. Like how a world-class city can have world-class suffering. Like how a child can be homeless in a country full of empty rooms. Like what it says about us when a person has to fight just to exist. Stay with me. This episode is not graphic. We won't sensationalize pain. We won't describe drug use in detail, and we won't glamorize hardship. We're here for dignity and truth, because homelessness is not content. It's a crisis with human faces. This is Homeless US News, where we bring you the stories that so often remain unheard. Today, we're going deep into Chicago. Not just the numbers, not just the headlines. We're going into the roots, history, inequality, housing, health, and the systems that decide who gets caught when life falls apart. We're going to meet people whose names we will change for privacy, but whose stories reflect thousands. And we're going to ask the question that matters most. What would it actually take to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring in a city built on ambition? Because this is not just about who is sleeping outside. This is about what kind of city we're willing to be. Part 1. The reality on the ground, where survival becomes a routine. On the street, time feels different. For someone with housing, a day is built around choices. Work, errands, family, rest. For someone without housing, the day is built around necessities. Food, bathrooms, warmth, safety, a place to sit without being told to move, a place to charge a phone, a place to exist without being treated like a problem. In Chicago, those necessities can become a daily obstacle course. If you sleep outside, the first problem is always the same. Where do you go next? Not next week, not next month, next hour. You look for a place that's visible enough to deter harm, but not so visible that you're forced to leave. You try to stay close to services, but services have limits. You try to stay close to transit, but transit costs money. You try to stay near people you trust, but trust is fragile when everyone is under pressure. And then there's the shelter system, often described like it's a simple answer. Why don't they just go to a shelter? Because shelters are not one thing. Some are safer than others. Some have rules that are hard to meet when you're living in chaos. Some separate families. Some have limited space. Some are full before you arrive. Some feel dangerous if you've lived through trauma. Some can't accommodate pets. And for many people, a pet is the last remaining bond that keeps them alive. Even when someone wants help, help can feel like a maze. Paperwork, appointments, eligibility requirements, long waits, short stays. A person may be asked to solve the very problems created by homelessness, like lack of documents, lack of transportation, lack of stability before they're allowed into stability. And while all of this is happening, the city moves around them. People hurry past, trains arrive, office lights turn on, tourists take pictures, delivery trucks unload. The sidewalk becomes a fast river. and the person sitting on the edge of it becomes invisible. That invisibility does damage, because the longer someone stays unhoused, the more their world shrinks, their relationships strain, their health declines, their hope gets thinner, their confidence fades, their memory becomes crowded with small humiliations, being ignored, being judged, being treated like a threat, being told to get a job by someone who doesn't understand that. Getting a job without a safe place to sleep is like trying to build a house without a foundation. And in Chicago, the environment can turn hardship into danger quickly. In summer, heat exhaustion and dehydration are real threats, especially for older adults and people with medical conditions. In winter, cold exposure can become life-threatening. Wind and moisture turn clothing heavy. Hands go numb. Feet ache. A person can't rest because rest requires stillness, and stillness in extreme cold can be risky. This is the reality behind the word homeless, not just a missing address. A daily, exhausting fight to meet basic human needs in public. Part 2. How Chicago got here. History does not stay in the past. To understand homelessness in Chicago today, you have to understand that it didn't start today. Chicago grew through industry, migration, and promise. People came from rural areas, from the South, from other countries, chasing work and safety. The city expanded. Factories roared. Neighborhoods formed identities that still shape Chicago's map. But growth did not land evenly. When industry declined, entire communities lost jobs. When jobs disappeared, incomes fell. When incomes fell, housing became unstable. And when housing becomes unstable in a city with long-standing segregation and inequality, the damage concentrates. Chicago's history includes policies and practices that shaped where people could live, what resources they could access, and what kind of wealth they could build. Discriminatory housing practices, redlining, and segregation didn't just harm individuals. They shaped neighborhoods for generations. They influenced school funding, healthcare access, transportation, employment opportunities, and the stability of families. That stability matters because homelessness is often the end of a chain. If your neighborhood has fewer job opportunities, one layoff hits harder. If your neighborhood has fewer clinics, a health crisis lasts longer. If your neighborhood has fewer affordable apartments, a rent increase becomes a disaster. If your neighborhood has fewer supports for mental health, a breakdown becomes a free fall. In other words, homelessness is not only a personal emergency, it is the result of a system that decides, over decades, who gets cushioning and who hits concrete. Then comes modern pressure, housing costs, low wages for many workers, and a safety net that often feels too small for the weight placed on it. When rent rises faster than paychecks, more people live one crisis away from eviction. When a family is already spending most of its income on housing, one medical bill, one reduction in hours, one car repair, one unexpected funeral expense can flip stability into survival. And in a city as big as Chicago, where thousands of families live near that edge, the edge becomes crowded. It's important to say this clearly. Most people who experience homelessness are not lazy. They are not choosing the street. Many are working. Many are caring for children. Many are dealing with illness. Many are escaping unsafe situations. Many are navigating trauma. Many are doing everything society tells them to do until something breaks. Chicago's homelessness crisis is not just about individual misfortune. It's about cumulative pressure, historical inequality plus modern costs plus limited support. And once that pressure hits, the street becomes the place where the system stores its failures. Part 3. The faces behind the statistics, Samuel and Rosa. Statistics can inform us, but statistics can also protect us. Numbers let us talk about suffering without feeling it. So instead of starting with a number, let's start with a person. Samuel is a name we're using to protect privacy. His story reflects a pattern that outreach workers hear constantly. Samuel is in his early 40s. For years, he worked a steady job. He was not rich, but he was stable. He had a routine, a paycheck, a sense of identity. Then the factory downsized. The job disappeared. Samuel tried to find another position, but the longer he stayed unemployed, the more stressed he became. He began struggling with anxiety and depression. At first, he told himself it was temporary. He told himself to tough it out. But mental health doesn't always wait for you to be strong. When symptoms grow, everyday tasks become heavy. Calls go unanswered. Paperwork piles up. Motivation evaporates. Sleep breaks. You stop showing up as the person you used to be. Samuel fell behind on rent. Then he fell behind on bills. Then he started borrowing. Then borrowing turned into debt. Then debt turned into eviction risk. One day, stability ended. Not with a dramatic explosion, with a quiet collapse. And once Samuel was outside, everything got harder. It became harder to keep appointments, harder to apply for jobs, harder to stay clean, harder to carry documents without losing them, harder to sleep enough to think clearly, harder to believe in himself when the world kept treating him like he was already lost. Now meet Rosa. Rosa is a single mother with 2 children. She worked. She managed a budget. She did what parents do. She held the family together with effort and exhaustion. Then layoffs hit. The income dropped. Rosa tried to keep the rent paid. She used savings. She stayed with friends. She juggled childcare. She looked for work. She made calls. She filled out forms. But friends can only host for so long. Apartments require deposits. Landlords require income proof. Waiting lists move slowly, and a family can be pushed into homelessness not because they didn't try, but because the system demands stability from people who are currently losing it. Rosa ended up in a shelter, and that changes everything for children, because homelessness is not only about where you sleep. It affects school, it affects health, it affects stress levels, it affects a child's ability to feel safe. Kids living in temporary housing can carry invisible burdens, anxiety, shame, exhaustion, fear of losing their parents' attention because the parents are fighting systems all day. Parents like Rosa often feel guilt, even when the crisis is not their fault, because parenting in survival mode feels like failing even when you're doing the impossible. Samuel and Rosa show 2 different roads into the same crisis. One is a loss of work combined with untreated mental health struggles. The other is economic shock combined with the fragility of housing access. Neither story is about moral weakness. Both stories are about a society where one disruption can erase years of effort. And that leads us to the harshest chapter in Chicago, winter. Part 4, Winter in Chicago, when a night outside can become life-threatening. Chicago calls itself the Windy City. For tourists, it's a nickname. For someone sleeping outside, it can feel like a warning. When the temperature drops and the wind rises, the street becomes hostile. The cold isn't only uncomfortable, it can overwhelm the body. Fingers stiffen, feet go numb, breathing can hurt, clothing becomes damp, and damp clothing becomes danger. A person can start the night thinking they can manage and end the night in a medical emergency. In winter, shelters fill fast. People line up hoping there is space. Some nights, the line is long enough to feel like a public confession of desperation. But even in winter, shelter isn't always accessible. Some people avoid shelters because of trauma. Crowded spaces can feel unsafe. People with anxiety may panic in confined environments. Some people have had belongings stolen. Some people fear violence. Some people can't bring their partner. Some can't bring their pet. Some feel they will be treated like a rule violation instead of a human being. And there is a deeper truth here. Shelter is not the same as housing. A shelter bed can save a life for one night, but if a person has no path to stable housing, they remain trapped in a cycle. One night inside, one night outside, one night in a different place, constant movement, constant instability. That cycle erodes people. It erodes health. It erodes hope. It erodes the ability to plan. Winter also reveals something else, how society values visibility. When cold weather hits, public attention rises. Politicians talk about warming centers. News stories appear briefly. Donations increase. But homelessness doesn't disappear in spring. It just becomes easier for the public to ignore. And that pattern is part of the systemic failure. A crisis that only becomes urgent when it is deadly is a crisis that is already being mismanaged. Chicago does have efforts, to provide warming centers and emergency supports during extreme cold. Community groups mobilize. Volunteers work overtime. Outreach teams push harder. But every winter, the same question returns. How can a city this large, this wealthy, this capable, still have people sleeping outside in conditions that threaten life? The answer is not that the city lacks compassion. The answer is that the city lacks enough exits, enough affordable apartments, enough supportive housing placements, enough mental health capacity, enough prevention support to stop people from falling in the first place. Winter doesn't create homelessness. It exposes how dangerous homelessness already is. Part 5. The system, help that exists, but doesn't always reach people. Chicago invests money into addressing homelessness. The city and state support shelters, outreach, housing programs, and services. There are plans, strategies, and initiatives designed to reduce homelessness and create pathways to stability. So the question is not, is anything being done? The real question is the system built to match the scale and complexity of the crisis? Because homelessness is not one problem. It's housing plus health plus income plus trauma plus paperwork plus time. And time matters. If someone is living outside, they are spending most of their day surviving. That means less time for forms, less time for appointments, less time to sit on hold, less time to navigate systems that require patience and consistency. Then there's coordination. A person may need mental health care, addiction treatment, job support, legal help, and housing access all at the same time. But those services often operate separately. Different offices, different requirements, different schedules, different caseworkers, different databases. So the person in crisis becomes the one responsible for connecting the dots. And that is a problem because crisis reduces capacity. When someone is traumatized, depressed, anxious, sleep deprived, and physically exhausted, asking them to become their own case manager is unrealistic. It's like asking someone who is drowning to fill out a form before you throw them a rope. This is why some programs focus on a principle that has shaped modern homelessness policy. In many places, housing first. Housing first is built on a simple idea. People are more likely to recover, stabilize, and rebuild when they have housing first, not after they've proven they deserve it. Because stability creates the conditions for progress. A door that locks makes it easier to sleep. Sleep makes it easier to think. Thinking makes it easier to keep appointments. Keeping appointments makes it easier to access healthcare. Healthcare makes it easier to work. Work makes it easier to maintain housing. It's a chain, and housing is often the first link. But housing first faces barriers in Chicago like it does in many cities. Lack of affordable units, long waitlists, funding limitations, and community resistance to new supportive housing developments. And meanwhile, the crisis continues. Another system challenge is the way society frames addiction. We need to talk about this carefully. Addiction does affect homelessness, and homelessness can intensify addiction. People living outside are exposed to constant stress, trauma, and instability. Some use substances to cope. Some struggle with dependency that began long before homelessness. And the overdose crisis, fueled in part by fentanyl in many regions, has increased the risk of death in communities already vulnerable. But addiction is not a moral identity. It is a health issue, and people cannot recover in chaos as easily as they can recover in stability. A system that punishes people for struggling will not produce recovery. A system that supports people through relapse risk and trauma, while offering stable housing and accessible treatment, has a stronger chance. The hardest truth is this: the system often treats homelessness as a behavior problem, but homelessness is a conditions problem. It is what happens when housing is scarce, wages are low, healthcare is hard to access, and the safety net is too thin. And until the system is designed around conditions, not blame, the crisis will keep repeating. Part 6. The people who refuse to look away. Community as a life support system. When government systems move slowly, another force becomes visible in Chicago: community. Not the idea of community, the real thing. The people who show up in neighborhoods across the city organizations, faith communities, outreach teams, and volunteers do work that rarely becomes a headline. They distribute meals, they offer mobile support, they connect people to clinics, they help replace IDs, they provide warm clothing, they sit and listen, they treat a person like a person, because sometimes the first step out of homelessness is not housing paperwork. Sometimes it's being seen. There are outreach efforts in Chicago that bring services to people who can't or won't access traditional shelters. There are groups that provide basic healthcare support and connections to longer-term services. There are job training programs rooted in the reality of trauma. There are advocates pushing policy forward so that homelessness is addressed not as a nuisance, but as a crisis of dignity and equity. And there are ordinary residents who do small things that matter more than they realize. A retired nurse who hands out soup because she can't stand the idea of people going hungry. A teacher who quietly keeps snacks in a desk drawer for students who don't have enough at home. A neighbor who doesn't call someone dirty or crazy, but recognizes that trauma can change behavior, and that respect is not a reward, it's a requirement. These acts don't replace policy, but they keep people alive while policy catches up. They also show us what's possible when a city decides it will not abandon its own. And that's where hope becomes real, not hope as a slogan, but hope as a strategy. Because there are models that work, prevention programs that stop evictions, rental assistance that keeps families housed, supportive housing paired with health care, mental health crisis response that doesn't rely only on enforcement, coordinated entry systems that reduce confusion and speed up placement, expanded shelter options that prioritize safety and dignity. These solutions aren't magic. They require funding, coordination, and political courage. They require public support. They require communities to accept that housing and services belong in real neighborhoods, not hidden far away. And they require one more thing: a cultural shift, a shift away from dehumanization. Because the fastest way to keep homelessness growing is to treat the unhoused as other, as if they belong to a different species of society, as if they deserve their suffering. But the truth is simpler. Homelessness is often a few disasters away from millions of people. A health crisis, a layoff, a rent increase, a family breakup, a death, a mental health collapse. And when that happens, the person you thought could never end up outside becomes the person on the sidewalk. That's why this story matters. Not because Chicago is unique in having homelessness, but because Chicago is a test of what America does when a great city faces a crisis that can't be solved by looking away. Outro. If you heard their stories, you share the responsibility now. If this video stayed with you, don't push that feeling away. Because the most dangerous thing about homelessness is not only the cold, not only the heat, not only the lack of shelter. It's the way society learns to tolerate it. It's the way we get used to seeing people suffer. It's the way we turn human beings into background noise. Chicago does not have to accept this as normal. No city does. Homelessness is not inevitable. It is not a natural disaster. It is not weather. It is the result of human systems, human decisions, and human priorities. And if humans can create these conditions, humans can change them. Here's what you can do without pretending one person can fix everything. Support local organizations that provide outreach, shelter, housing placement, mental health services, and eviction prevention. Volunteer if you can. Donate if you can. Share resources. Advocate for affordable housing and supportive services in your city. Because real solutions require real capacity, not just frustration. And in your daily life, choose one small act that costs nothing but matters more than people realize. Refuse to dehumanize. Don't reduce someone to a sidewalk. Don't reduce someone to a diagnosis. Don't reduce someone to their worst day. Because dignity is not something you earn after you become stable. Dignity is what helps you become stable. This is Homeless US News. If you want us to cover another city, another neighborhood, or another part of this crisis that your community is facing, tell us in the comments. Share this documentary so the truth doesn't stay hidden behind skyscrapers and bright lights. Subscribe if you want reporting that centers humanity, not stereotypes. And if you made it to the end, thank you for staying with the hard reality. Because once you truly see people, you can't unsee them. And that is where change begins.